Well, like I said, we chatted 9 years ago. Gosh, it feels like a lifetime ago. But
You
why don't you
think?
remind
You
people?
think? Has the world
Yeah.
changed at all over 8 years?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Some ways for the better, some ways for the worse. But I would love for you just to reintroduce yourself to the listeners who weren't here that first time around.
Sure. My name is Joshua Becker, and I am the founder and editor of becomingminimalist.com, a website that I started 17 years ago. I believe the first website dedicated entirely to minimalism. Speaking of how much the world has changed, now there's hundreds and thousands of them. I used to be a pastor for 15 years, and now I've been writing full time about minimalism for the last 13 years. My wife and I have been married 26 years. I have two kids. My son Salem is 23. My daughter Alexa is 19, and we live just outside Phoenix.
Okay, Phoenix. I'm curious, did you ever foresee yourself writing about minimalism? And maybe that blends into what started your pursuits there with scripture, but moving from pastor to now your full-time job is writing about minimalism and simplicity. Did you ever foresee that?
No, I did not. I loved pastoring, and I thought I would pastor for the rest of my life. I'm one of the rare writers whose goal wasn't to become a full-time writer. I loved my full-time job, and writing about minimalism had just become a hobby and a passion. I found that the website, minimalism, was very new back then, and people were very interested in it. And I think I found a unique voice, both in my own story and how I talked about the topic, that the website grew pretty quickly. And there came a point where I realized I couldn't do both, couldn't pastor full time and write and speak about minimalism full time. And so I need to make a decision. And the short story is, it occurred to me that there were a lot of better pastors than me in the world. But at the time, there weren't a lot of people writing about minimalism, connecting with people the way I was. So that brought about that transition, 13, 14 years ago.
So you moved from pastoring into this realm that needed a voice like yours, specifically speaking to the spiritual side of minimalism, because it is spiritual, the way that our possessions affect us. I'm wanting to know how that became personal for you back then.
Well, so I'll take a step back. And so I was pastoring, talking about the Bible, talking about Jesus for my full-time job. I started the Becoming Minimalist, and at first that was my voice. I felt like I was still, I would say, Pastor Joshua, writing about the Bible and Jesus. And it occurred to me not too long in, maybe a couple months in, that minimalism is a message that benefits people regardless of their faith or non-faith background. A little bit like clean water is good regardless if you're a Christian or no religion or any other religion. Maybe it's a bit of an overstatement that minimalism is the same as clean water, but it can almost feel about as healthy sometimes for our soul and hearts. And so becoming minimalist became a place where I didn't write specifically for any faith or non-faith background. I was just talking about the benefits of owning less.
Yeah.
As I was writing about that, and I was still living out my faith and still passionate about trying to follow Jesus with my life, I began to read the Bible differently than I did before. And I'm not sure why I never saw it before, but like Jesus and the New Testament was constantly talking about giving up your possessions and sharing with others who had need, and giving up the world for things that are more important in our spiritual selves. And I began to see that quite a bit, which started me on this journey of beginning to understand, I think, Christ's invitation to minimalism better than I ever had before.
Absolutely. It's funny. I would say around the time, I just remember the church that I was going to around the time that you were probably stepping into this space and that I was starting to consider minimalism. We read the book by Randy Alcorn called Money, Possessions, and Eternity.
Really?
And it's dense. Are you familiar?
When people ask me for the most influential book I've ever read on minimalism, that's the one I cite.
Okay. Well, I know you cited Randy in your book. But yeah, I think a lot of this was coming together for me at that point too. And again, I didn't read through the entire book because it's weighty.
Mm-hmm.
However, if we don't acknowledge as believers that there is a connection to our possessions and the way that we're living or the abundance that can be had in our life, I think we're missing a great gift, as you say, this gift of like maybe the positive side of minimalism or this simple rich life that we don't even realize we have access to. And you mentioned in your book, Colin, I want to make sure I quote it right. As Christians, we are swimming in a culture of materialism, but it feels so normal and expected. We don't realize we are drowning in it, sacrificing the fullness of life to it. And so I think there's just a lack of awareness as well.
Yeah. One of the verses that I use in Uncluttered Faith, and at the time was, I mean, it was more than a passing reference, but it wasn't like the full weight of the book was resting on this passage. But the more I think about it, the more it keeps coming back to me. And it's a story that people, whether you're Christian or not, you'll know the story. There's two stories right next to each other, the story of the great pearl and then the story of the great treasure. And Jesus compares the kingdom of God to this great pearl that a merchant finds. The merchant sells all of his other goods so that he can have the money to buy the pearl of great price, right? It's a phrase that we use across the spectrum. And then there's a second story of a man who finds a field with a great treasure in it, sells all he has so that he can buy the field and own this great treasure. And this is a story that I've known for years since I was a kid. And the version was always, hey, what God is offering to our souls and to our hearts is better than anything that the world can offer. And in comparison, there's nothing that the world can offer that compares to what God offers. But I started to notice that the story isn't just about the pearl or the treasure. The story is about the man or the woman who sells everything in order to take hold of the pearl. And I think in America, I think in a lot of developed nations around the world, we're trying to do both. We want the spiritual benefits in our life, but we also want to keep the world as well. And so we keep buying stuff, we keep owning stuff, we keep chasing bigger houses and nicer cars and more clothing and technology. Like we want the world and the kingdom of God. But the story that Jesus says is no, you can't afford both. You got to give up the world in order to enjoy all the spiritual benefits, all the blessings, all that I want to give to your heart and soul and mind.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you say we preach against materialism, but we practice it just the same. I think that a lot of Christians listening do well for themselves. They have wealth, they have abundance, and they're thinking to themselves, am I doing something wrong by just the category that I'm in, I guess we'll say. Like, is that inherently wrong?
Certainly no. As a matter of fact, I think that Christians should be among the most well compensated people in the world. Like we should be the hardest working. We should be the most honest, the most people of integrity and character. We should be the people that everyone wants to work alongside, serving others and helping others and giving our full selves to the work that God has called us to do. And so John Wesley, in a sermon, he says that as Christians, we should earn as much as we can, we should save as much as we can, and we should give as much as we can. And certainly we should be earning our money in godly, moral ways. And when he says save money, he doesn't mean like build the biggest retirement account that you can possibly have. He says, don't waste money on things you don't need. Don't buy a bunch of trivialities and don't be chasing after the world. Save your money for more important things. And then we should be giving as much as we can to support those problems that we want to see in the world, the problems that we want to solve in the world, I should say.
Yeah.
And so, no, I don't think it's sinful to earn. I don't think it's sinful to be wealthy. I think it's difficult to be wealthy. I think that there's a lot of temptations that come along with having a lot of money, such as buying a lot of stuff. But I think in and of itself, it's not immoral.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad that you spoke to that. I'd love for you now to transition a little bit into the spiritual benefits of minimalism that you talk to. You speak specifically about 13 in the book. I'd love for you just to share a few that maybe have been of the most beneficial to you, maybe even your wife. I would just love to hear her perspective. I know she's not here, but I'd love to hear just even some insight into how this has affected her life.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's a helpful question. I was going to mention, as if I haven't talked enough already, I was going to mention, I think one of the things that the church is very good about talking down about materialism and consumerism and talking about all the evils of materialism, but I don't think the church is doing a good job about talking about the benefits and the good things that come into our lives when we live minimally, which is what I want to do with the book. And so literally it is a list of 13 benefits, spiritual benefits that come into our lives when we start living out what Jesus invited us to. And I'll define probably the one that was the most influential to me. It's the one that I led the book with. What I learned about myself by becoming minimalist as I began taking boxes of things to Goodwill. I always say, like, I took a van load of stuff to Goodwill. It felt great. A second van load. By like the third or fourth van load of things I was taking to Goodwill, I started to ask myself, how did I have 3 van loads of things in my house that I didn't need? Or how could I have 3 van loads of things that I didn't need, and yet I was still buying more and more and more? What was motivating me to do that? It certainly wasn't a healthy motivation. And I think when we become minimalist and we start asking some of those hard questions, because as you know, it's pretty emotionally difficult and mentally difficult and physically difficult to declutter. I think I started running into things like jealousy and selfishness and greed and wanting to look successful and wanting to impress other people and just following the crowd more than I thought. And learning about those things is difficult, but I think it is really important in our spiritual walk to do that. For my wife, I don't know. I probably should ask her. I would be fascinated to know what she would say. I know she loves that we get to be more generous than we ever used to be. As we began owning less and had more finances to give and try to solve problems. We started a nonprofit that is working to change orphan care around the world. My wife was adopted as a newborn out of a hospital in South Dakota. And so I know she's always been passionate about helping orphan and vulnerable children. And so I know that that's one of the ones that she loves the most. But there's others, and we could talk about more of them if you want, for sure.
I guess the better question would have been, because I'm trying to remember, I know you didn't go into details of how you actually started out on that minimalist pursuit, but it was a neighbor in your garage, right? You had started decluttering your garage because your neighbor had said something. Remind me.
Yes, that is the story. That was a Saturday morning, and I was cleaning out my garage while my 5-year-old son was playing alone in the backyard, and ended up spending hours in my garage. And my neighbor introduces me to the word minimalism. And I'm like, yeah, why in the world am I wasting all this time taking care of dirty, dusty possessions while my son is playing alone in the backyard on the swing set? And so that was how I was introduced to it.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I was just curious. Sorry, this is a little bit disjointed, but just what your wife's perspective was back then and how she came alongside and is now walking this life with you.
Yeah.
I didn't clarify kind of what I was looking for there, but it benefits her as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so I was in the garage cleaning all morning long, and my wife was cleaning the inside of the house, and my 2-year-old daughter was next to her, and my 5-year-old son was alone. And so by the early afternoon, when my neighbor introduced me to minimalism, and I came in, and Kim was cleaning like her 3rd toilet of the day, and Mike, you'll never guess what June just told me. She told me about minimalism. Like, my wife was in the right spot to hear the message at the same time that I was. And so she was like, you're right. Let's get rid of some of the stuff. And certainly our spirituality aligned on that. There's more important things to be chasing than what the world can offer. We are aligned with that. So, but the way I usually explain it is, if I want to get rid of 80% of our stuff, Kim was on board to get rid of 40% of our stuff. And so the first layers went pretty well. And then I'm like, let's get rid of more. And she's like, I think we're at a pretty good spot right now. And so learning to compromise there, which I think is how it is in almost any marriage relationship, with anything where, like, even if you agree on it, like
Mm.
we both want to be involved in church. Well, how involved are we? Like, how many nights out of the week do we go, and how often do we serve? And we both want to save money. Well, how much money do we want to save? We want to discipline our kids the same way, but okay, when does an action call for discipline and when does it not? Like, you can be aligned, but still, I think, differ in the exact way that that plays out.
Absolutely. Well, and maybe that kind of leads into my next question or thought I have for you in regards to the spiritual benefits. And that is that it's not just the tangible things that we like. Once we get the tangible things out of the way, that we can shift our focus to the schedule, the things we're saying yes to, the relationships. So curious to know how minimalism has affected your spiritual life for the better when it comes to your relationships and those other non-tangible things.
Yeah, I think what minimalism did, maybe more than anything else, well, it cleared up all the time and space and energy and money that, we talk about. What it also did is it brought intentionality into my life in ways that I wasn't expecting at the time or wasn't living out. And I think the best way to think of it is, like, no one sets out and says that their greatest goal in life is to just have as much clutter in their home as possible. Like, no one says their greatest goal is to just own as much stuff as they possibly can. But it just subtly becomes our way of life because society calls us to that. Advertisements move us in that direction. I think there's some heart attitudes in all of us that move us in that direction. And so if we have a house full of things that we don't need, it's just a sign of living a pretty unintentional life and not being thoughtful about what we buy and what we keep. And so once you notice that in your possessions, and once you start embracing intentionality in your possessions, you can't help but start to think about, how am I spending my time, and how am I spending my money, and what are the habits that I have in my life, and am I prioritizing people enough and the right people, and what are the boundaries that I need to establish to be living out my best life in all these areas. And so, and how intentional am I in my spiritual walk? And one of the most fascinating stats is that the average American spends 10 minutes a day on faith-based practices, and that's corporate and personal. But the average American spends 2 hours a day managing, shopping, taking care of their physical possessions. So there's a very direct correlation between how much physical stuff we have and how much time we're able to focus on our heart and mind and soul.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like I'll confess here, as we're having this conversation about spirituality, again, looking back to 10 years ago when the podcast was first started, and I was really gung ho about minimalism, getting things out of my house. It's kind of like when you become a new believer. You're like a flame for the Lord.
Mm.
You're so excited to start this new lifestyle. But I've noticed in the last 10 years, specifically maybe in the last couple of years, it has actually, for me, been more of a struggle to combat some of those consumeristic tendencies, because I think I'm a little bit bored. Like, I have become, in a sense, complacent, or it's like, for so long I didn't buy anything and now I want to buy some things. And so I do think that it's more about my heart posture, I think, in all of it. And I'm needing to look back to the benefit of why I originally started this, or maybe I just need to fill my time with something greater. I don't think you probably can relate to that necessarily, but I have found it more of a struggle these last few years, because like I got rid of all the things. I've gotten rid of the relationships that are no longer a benefit. But yeah, I think sometimes you just get bored and you can fall back into bad habits.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole science of habits is, if you're going to get rid of a habit that you used to spend time on, like, you got to be real intentional about what you're going to fill that time and fill that space with, because nature abhors a vacuum, right? And so when we leave open space, things are going to fill back in there. And so when I talk about minimalism, I always talk about, hey, you're going to free up time and space, and you get to use that time and space for anything that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm serious about that. Like, you can own less stuff and you can travel more, you can own less stuff so you can retire early, you can own less stuff so you can have a ton of money in the bank. Like you can fill your newfound freedom with anything that you want. And so knowing what we're backfilling that with is pretty important. And
Mhm.
I'm under the impression that, hey, I can own less stuff and go travel the world and still find that traveling the world doesn't satisfy my soul. I can
Yeah.
own less stuff and retire early and find out that sitting on a beach every day doesn't fulfill my soul,
Mhm.
which is why I think I've always been so thankful for my relationship with Jesus and my passion for God and the kingdom, because it gave a natural place for that money to go and for that time
Mhm.
to go and energy and even just creativity and mental energy. And so not that I'm perfect, like I shouldn't overstate
No.
anything in that direction, but try my best.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know why I'm sharing that. I think that it's just this is convicting to me, hearing your passion for it and the why behind it. It's just getting, especially here at the beginning of the year, like getting rerouted
Mm.
into why I set out on this path and not to lose sight of it. And again, it's a benefit to not have to clean up as much or to have to manage as many things. But it's like, what were the other reasons they initially set out to do this? And so this is just, I think, a good reminder for me as well.
As for me, like my
Mhm.
story isn't that I became a minimalist so that I could follow Jesus better. Like I
Mhm.
became a minimalist because I wanted to spend less time cleaning my garage. That was the felt need at the time. And then as I pursued that and began asking more and more questions, then it certainly helped that I was a pastor at the time, even for 3 years while I was living this out. And so I think that became a natural connection, but
Mhm.
it wasn't where I started either. And it's probably not where a lot of people start.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I'll ask you here, kind of as we wrap up. I want to make sure that we shared the main points and touched on some of the main points. I love that you share so many statistics throughout the book because I think so often people are like, well, is there really science behind the way that we're living or why we're doing this thing? So it's really rich and full of that in here, as well as personal anecdotes of your own life. But was there something that you wanted to make sure that you hit on for listeners before we wrap up?
One of my passions for writing the book is, again, a real common story that people know inside and outside the church. There's a parable of 4 soils that Jesus talks about, and the first seed lands and nothing happens with it. The second seed symbolizes someone who gets really excited about Christianity, about faith, but doesn't grow any roots and fades away. The fourth seed grows roots and becomes fruitful. The third seed lands on soil, grows roots, but doesn't produce any fruit. And it's one of the only parables that Jesus explains. And he tells us exactly what chokes out the fruitfulness of our faith. And he says it is money, possessions, and worries. Well, let me rephrase that. Wealth, pleasures, and worries that chokes out the fruitfulness of our faith. And if anyone is listening to this who is feeling a little stuck in their Christian life or just wants to grow more and be more fruitful, I think minimalism provides the pathway for that. I think the book is great for anyone who is not even necessarily a Christian, but is interested in spiritual things, is interested in what Jesus and the Bible says about possessions and the benefits of minimalism. I think there's great connections there. But my hope is that we all become a lot more fruitful, that we get to know Jesus better through minimalism, well, through his word, but minimalism provides the pathway for that, and that we become more fruitful in helping others grow in their faith as well.
Yes, again, full of good reminders for people that want to reshift their focus on the things above that we can take with us into the afterlife. I know people don't like to think about mortality, but we're not taking our things with us. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I think if the church as a whole took this position and just started reconsidering, there's so much more work to be done, and our things just get in the way of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, thanks for having this conversation. And it's probably not your typical topic on the podcast, but or maybe it is more than I think, but it's an important one. So thank you.
No, it is. And just really quickly, where can listeners find it and connect with you? You said Becoming Minimalist is your website,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, becomingminimalist.com is a home base for me. The book is available everywhere, anywhere and everywhere you like to buy books, and in all formats. I shouldn't be surprised, but I get more emails than I think where people say, is it available in audiobook? And I'm like, can you even do a book nowadays without doing an audiobook?
Yeah.
Yes, there's certainly audio and digital and hard copy.
Well, Joshua, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate, again, personally, the reminder. So thanks for joining me.
Great. Thank you.